1970s Britain was characterised by its eclectic pop culture, spanning from glam rock to skinheads, punks and the Hells Angels. In some areas there was a carefree, good time atmosphere, but elsewhere the country grappled with high youth unemployment, political division, industrial unrest and rising violence. Despite the prevalence of motorcycle gangs among a sizable subculture of teens and young adults, many members were both morally and financially bankrupt and could not afford bikes, later lyricised in the Clash's bleak anti-anthem "This is England" with the line, "I got my motorcycle jacket but I'm walking all the time." It was against this backdrop that sign maker John Amadio went for a walk along the south side of Aldrington Basin at Shoreham Harbour in Hove on the evening of Thursday 19th of April 1973. He was expecting nothing more than a relaxing stroll and paused to light a cigarette as he took in his surroundings. On one side he could see the bustling town, on the other the cold expanse of the English Channel. He watched as a Dutch ship turned itself around in the widest part of the basin. Notwithstanding the financial and cultural challenges faced by the nation, Shoreham was a lively yet ordinarily peaceful West Sussex town, so what happened next came as a shock. The boat's propellers stirred ripples through the murky harbour waters, and a few moments later an object bobbed about on the surface, disturbed by the boat's motion and lifted from the silt below. At first John thought it was a tyre, but when he moved closer he realised his mistake. It was a body. 2 constables arrived in response to John's agitated call, and they rowed out into the harbour to tow the body to shore, using a boat hook to snag the epaulette of the corpse's navy blue jacket. It felt extraordinarily heavy, the reason for which became clear once the police wrestled it onto the quayside. The body was that of a well-built man, his arms and legs bound, with a blue plastic bag filled with concrete blocks tied to him with rope. Someone had evidently taken great care to ensure he would sink to the bottom and never resurface. Officers quickly set up canvas screens to shield the deceased from public view and placed an urgent call to headquarters. It was the day before the start of the long Easter weekend, and Detective Chief Superintendent James Marshall was just about to finish up for the break when he was called out to the crime scene. His team of detectives had just solved the murder of a 15-year-old girl who had been stabbed to death while hitchhiking, but it looked like they would have no time to rest on their laurels and would be launched straight into another murder inquiry. Pathologist Hugh Johnson, Professor of Forensic Medicine at St Thomas's Hospital in London, arrived at Aldrington Basin at 8 p.m. and conducted the examination in the semi-darkness, aided by floodlights. When the body was moved, one decaying hand fell to the ground. There was no scalp present on the head, and the face was mostly skeletonized, the flesh largely eaten by fish. Detectives surmised that the victim could have been murdered at sea, then weighted down and cast overboard. Professor Johnson carried out an extensive post-mortem at Hove Borough Mortuary and established that the victim was a young man of approximately 6 feet in height. His lower jaw was missing, as were several teeth in the upper jaw, and as his wisdom teeth were not present, Johnson assessed his age as around 18 or slightly younger. He wore a navy blue jacket with crested faux army-type buttons, a blue denim Levi's shirt, dark blue denim jeans, a white belt with a metal buckle, and black leather boots. On his right forearm was a tattoo of a heart pierced by an arrow with some indecipherable lettering. Above this was another faded tattoo consisting solely of letters, and Johnson had to rub away the top layers of skin to clearly reveal them as HAC. There was no sign of any head injury or strangulation, and the organs appeared normal. Through a process of matching microscopic algae found in his lungs to species of algae from Aldrington Basin, Johnson confirmed that he had drowned in the same area where his body was discovered. Inside the man's jacket pocket was a waterlogged copy of Arthur Conan Doyle's The Maracot Deep, a coincidentally marine-themed novel about a search for the legendary drowned city of Atlantis. In his trouser pocket were 2 folded pieces of paper and some loose change. The coins were decimal, indicating that the body had been in the water for less than 2 years, as the decimal system had been introduced in Britain in 1971. Once fully dried and smooth, investigators could see that one of the documents was a receipt from the Hove Magistrates Court. The other was a letter from Youth Employment Services dated 28th of February 1973, referring to a job interview for a Clive Olive as a packer at a local company. In another of the dead man's pockets, they discovered a white metal bracelet engraved with the name Ollie on one side and Julie on the reverse. Could Ollie be a shortened form of the surname Olive? In the absence of fingerprints, this proved to be a vital clue in tracing the victim's identity, as his fingertips had been eaten by fish, although one tiny palm print was obtained from the right hand and sent to the Sussex Fingerprint Bureau. The police soon established that a 16-year-old named Clive Edward Jeremy Olive had been in trouble with the police in January 1973 and had attended Hove Magistrates Court. He had signed a form there which had fortunately been kept in the court office, and forensics were able to lift a palm print from it which matched that of the deceased. Now they had confirmed the victim's identity, detectives worked to reconstruct his movements leading up to the final days of his life. Clive's distraught mother, Pauline Olive, had last seen her son at 6 p.m. on 28th of February 1973 and reported him missing on 2nd of March, which suggested he had been dead for around 6 weeks. Pauline identified the clothing found on the body, tearfully telling investigators that he wasn't a bad lad. Clive's father had left when he was 3 years old, and he had lived with his mother at Norfolk Terrace, just 2 miles from Aldrington Basin. At the time of his disappearance, Clive had spent the last 6 months working as a kitchen hand at the Gondola Cafe at 36 Church Road, Hove, washing dishes on the night shift. The Gondola was a popular meeting place and coffee spot for young people, and Clive enjoyed playing Jimi Hendrix records on the jukebox there. Pauline had initially assumed that her son was staying with a friend, but became concerned when he failed to come home the next day. She described him as the apple of my eye and a quiet boy who never lied to me. He enjoyed reading comics, loved his pet cat and guinea pig, and had once dreamed of being a vet. But things had changed. In the months before his death, he had dropped out of his O-level course at Brighton Technical College and spent most of his evenings loitering at a youth club, reading books about the occult and hanging around with the Mad Dogs of Sussex chapter of the Hells Angels. Clive didn't own a motorcycle, but this wasn't unusual, as the Mad Dogs were described by some as a poor imitation of the real thing, and few had their own bikes. Pauline remembered one occasion when the Mad Dogs came to their house and demanded to watch TV. When she refused, Clive left with them, but the next day she noticed her son had a black eye and a swollen face. The gang was infamous for starting fights, and its members wore steel toe-capped boots to make their kicks more damaging, so it seemed a distinct possibility that they had somehow been involved in Clive's death. Pauline recalled, "Their influence on Clive was far greater than mine. He did exactly as they told him to do. They were evil and horrible, and I did my best to keep him away from them." Some of the Mad Dogs were petty criminals and drug addicts, while others were known to practice black magic and torture animals. Just a month before his death, Clive had been arrested for breaking into a shop and stealing radios, resulting in his appearance at Hove Magistrates Court. The police established a murder squad comprising 60 officers who spoke to teenagers at beaches and showed Clive's photo in pubs and cafes to understand more about the teenager's life. They soon came across 15-year-old Julie Harmon, who transpired to be the Julie whose name was etched onto the bracelet found in Clive's pocket. The pair had dated for a time, and through her and her other friends, detectives learned that his activities had been more unsavoury and illegal than his mother realised. He was considered a loner by his peers and was known to roam the streets at night looking for fights, in which he would target gay men. He was alleged to have accepted money for sex, had as many as 6 aliases, and had recently begun experimenting with LSD and marijuana. Detective Chief Superintendent Marshall said, "While other boys his age worshipped footballer George Best, Ollie had other idols, the Hells Angels and the Mad Dogs of Sussex, who lived by fear and violent rituals." By way of initiation into the Mad Dogs, Clive took part in a ceremony on Brighton Beach, which involved members of the gang urinating on his clothes and cutting their arms and mixing their blood with his over the saddle of a motorbike. To prove himself, he frequently brawled with rival chapter members, and on one occasion he was sitting in a cafe with a friend when he suddenly abandoned his coffee and ran outside to chase down 2 skinheads walking past. When he returned to the cafe after coming off best in the ensuing scuffle, he carried an air of smug satisfaction. Clive subsequently became unpopular with the Mad Dogs due to his unreliability when it came to attending gang meetings and a propensity for enjoying sexual liaisons with other members' girlfriends. He was known in the neighbourhood as the 10p Romeo or Coffee Bar Casanova because he boasted that he could, in his words, make love to any girl for the price of a coffee. He was said to have traded a former girlfriend in exchange for a packet of cigarettes within the Mad Dogs community, and was alleged to have impregnated 2 14-year-old girls. After being hospitalised in an attack spearheaded by the gang leader as retribution for his treachery, Clive joined a rival chapter in Hove named the Hells Angel Cougars, shedding light on the tattooed letters HAC. It was there that he started a relationship with 15-year-old Julie Harmon. Police interviewed more than 100 young people in the area, uncovering a subculture in which every member of the Mad Dogs had a nickname. Clive Olive was known as Ollie, Thicker, Simple, Loner, Rex or Randy, while the Vice President was Tramp, the Secretary was Bluey, and the Treasurer was Jip. It was so inscrutable that the police hired an interpreter whose sole job was to compile a glossary of phrases and names to help them decode the statements. Gradually, it emerged that Clive Olive was last seen alive in the Gondola Cafe, and one witness reported seeing a black Austin van driving out of Aldrington Basin on 28th of February. Interviews with gang members led investigators to former Mad Dog Brian Moore, who had allegedly paid people for information about Clive. Interestingly, his friend Albert Dawn owned a black Austin van. Albert was married to Brian's sister, 18-year-old Christine, and the three of them lived at the home of Brian and Christine's father. On 1st of May 1973, 12 days after Clive's body was discovered in the harbour, the police visited Brian, Albert and Christine at home. The Dawn's bedroom was decorated with swastikas, a picture of Hitler and Hell's Angels memorabilia, further convincing detectives that the trio were trouble and they were arrested on suspicion of murder. They initially denied knowing Clive Olive, but their stories unravelled and the truth was soon laid bare. Christine Dawn, née Moore, was nicknamed Butch and was 8 months pregnant. At 5'9", she towered over her 27-year-old labourer husband Albert, who was 5'3", almost entirely covered in tattoos, and went by the nickname Mouse. Brian Moore was a hefty 6'4", 21-year-old who worked in a garage and was known as a boastful, aggressive drifter with several convictions for theft. He had been placed in care at the age of 14 to protect him from his father's violence, but had recently returned to his childhood home, joining his sister and her husband. Brian had a checkered work history and recently spent 18 months at Brighton Aquarium, which ended with him pushing the manager into a pool in a fight over training methods. He spent some time at a flamingo park in Yorkshire, then at Windsor Safari Park, where he was promoted to deputy head keeper. All was well until an argument with his girlfriend provoked him into a gruesome suicide attempt, walking into the leopard cage and locking himself in. The leopards, however, had other ideas and simply ignored him. Brian became addicted to amphetamine and cannabis, joining the Mad Dogs in 1969. By then, he was working as a hotel night watchman, carrying a truncheon during his shifts. His sister Christine had an equally troubled past, having been sexually assaulted by one of her father's friends as a child. She spent 2 years in an approved school as a teenager and had been associated with various Hell's Angels chapters before marrying Albert. The couple eventually became disillusioned with their way of life and ditched the motorcycle gang, but Albert feared Moore and his erratic, belligerent attitude and continued to do his bidding. Around September 1972, Brian Moore fell in love with a 16-year-old named Jane Anson. Jane confided in him that she had once dated Clive Olive for a week after meeting him at a youth club, but that her parents hadn't liked him. On her 16th birthday on 9th of September, Clive tempted her into going home with him, assuring her that his mother would be there. When they arrived, Jane was perturbed to find that Clive's mother was away, and he had allegedly lured her there to rape her. Brian Moore was furious at this revelation, freely telling Jane and his friends, "I know who it is, I'm going to get him, I will get him sooner or later." On 27th of February 1973, Brian enlisted the help of Albert and Christine, and the three laid a trap for Clive Olive, offering to supply him with drugs if he met them the following night. They then stole some rope, a plastic bag and concrete blocks from a building site, and picked up Clive at the appointed hour. Once Clive had been bundled inside the van, Moore demanded to know if he knew Jane Anson. When he denied it, Moore angrily reminded him, "She was the one you raped." Sensing imminent danger and trying unsuccessfully to mitigate his guilt, Clive apparently replied, "I only raped her once." Moore was overcome with fury at this admission and started battering Clive with his fists. When the 16-year-old began to cry, Moore threatened, "I'll give you something to cry about." He hit him in the head with his truncheon and Clive screamed and slumped over, his eyes staring blankly as blood ran down his face. "Fucking hell, I think I've killed him," said Moore. Albert Dawn responded, "I hope you haven't got blood all over my van." Believing Clive to be dead, they bound up his body and weighted him down. Then the two men threw him into the harbour while Christine waited in the van. Unknown to the assailants, Clive was still alive and met his death by drowning, although he likely never regained consciousness after the truncheon blow and was unaware of being submerged in the chilly waters of Aldrington Basin. Afterwards, a calm and collected Albert Dawn ripped out the bloodstained carpet from his van and threw it on a rubbish tip, then painted the inside of the vehicle. Moore's written statement proved there was premeditation when he said, "The reason we took the concrete blocks and rope was because I thought I might lose my temper when we saw Ollie, and I thought I might kill him. I decided if I killed him, I would tie him up and put him in the harbour. I got the idea off the Mad Dogs, who were going to kill their leader in the same way. What got Albert was the bubbles. What got me was the staring eyes." On Monday 26th of November, the killer trio stood trial for murder at Lewes Crown Court, pleading not guilty by reason of diminished responsibility. By this time, Christine Dawn had given birth to a son while in custody at Holloway. Brian Moore cut a striking figure in the dock, clad in a bus conductor's jacket with his long red hair tied in a ponytail. Jane Anson spoke in the witness box about Brian's character, stating that her parents had approved of him. She described him as very kind and gentle and extremely loving and protective. It was a happy relationship until this business about Clive Olive came up between us when I told him Clive had raped me. We had a ritual burning of the clothes I'd been wearing at the time. When it was his turn to speak, Moore proclaimed his innocence, telling the stunned courtroom, "I don't feel I've done anything wrong. I knew it was against the law, but what he had done was also against the law. He raped my girl. Nobody else would do it, so I felt it would be my job. I think I've done Brighton and Hove a favour." Enraged by the prosecution's acerbic cross-examination, he bellowed, "You shut your mouth, or I'll belt you one, mate," then grabbed a bottle of water from the judge's bench and flung it at the barrister. Prison officers ran from the dock and grappled with the accused until they managed to subdue him. After a 9-day trial, the jury found Brian Moore and Albert Dawn guilty of murder, and they were sentenced to life imprisonment, while Christine Dawn received 10 years for manslaughter. On hearing the verdict, Christine fainted into the arms of a female prison officer, but recovered as she was led away, reviving sufficiently to scream at the judge, "You bastard." George Moore, Brian and Christine's father, sounded genuinely puzzled as he told the press, "I can't understand why they turned out like this. I used to be tough with them as children. I used to leave the imprint of my hand on their backsides, but the neighbours complained and the police warned me I had to stop." George Moore had himself been known for boasting about sexually assaulting several women in Italy during World War II, and had once let off a firework near his wife's face, causing her to lose her hearing. As he spoke, he showed no awareness of the irony of his words. In contrast, Pauline Olive expressed high regard for her son, recalling that Clive was a nice boy. "I could not have wished for a better son. All I can say is that I tried my best." Brian Moore and Albert Dawn's appeals were rejected the following year. Christine's manslaughter conviction was reversed as the judge felt she had only been a spectator to the murder. She was released on 21st of November 1974, but would later return to court more than once on lesser charges, unable to integrate into society as a law-abiding citizen. Albert was released on parole after 15 years, but it is unknown when Brian was released. Detective Jim Marshall's murder squad were so proud of the successful investigation that they had a necktie designed for each of the team, with blue fabric symbolising the sea and a gondola to represent the cafe, which had been one of Clive Olive's favourite venues. The Gondola Cafe, once suffused with the scent of fresh coffee and the rhythmic, flamboyant pulse of Jimi Hendrix, closed its doors just a few years after the murder, replaced now by an Argentine steakhouse, a modern restaurant where the jukebox and 10-pence coffees of Clive's youth are nothing but a distant memory.